Recorded.
All right, everybody. Hello. We're back with our weekly or semi-weekly chat with author Kevin McAleer on various forms of literature. We've been focusing on LA writers in recent weeks because he came out with a book called LA Kid with his publisher, Palmart Press. And there are other LA writers we've covered, such as Raymond Chandler, James M. Cain. Last week we had a session on Charles Bukowski, especially his autobiographical Ham on Rye. And this week we decided to go to another author that Kevin suggested named John Fante. And I had never even heard of this writer. I have a master's in English with an emphasis on literature and lifetime reading books in the LA area, but I've never even heard the name John Fante. But Kevin told me that Charles Bukowski was very much influenced by John Fante, so we might as well cover him while we're at it with the LA writer scene. And I got my copy at the Thousand Oaks Library, Ask the Dust. This is the book Kevin recommended we read this week. I've only gotten through about 2/3 of it. But Kevin apparently has read the whole thing. Did you read the whole thing again recently, or are you talking about past readings you've done?
This is about the third or fourth time I've read it. So I take the novel seriously, that as a preface to other comments down the line that you might hear from me.
Yeah.
Regarding the book.
Okay.
I take it very seriously, and it's a book I actually used as a kind of semi-template for the last novel I wrote, which is my fifth, which is yet to be published, but it's complete. And it's about me trying to become a writer in Berlin 30 years ago in a place called Prenzlauer Berg, which is sort of a bohemian part of town, certainly was back then, former East Germany. And talking about the 2 or 3 years that I spent, well, that's the framework of the novel. Spent actually 6 years in Prenzlauer Berg trying to become a writer, because Ask the Dust, I think, is mostly about a young kid who migrates from his hometown, in this case, to Los Angeles. In my case, it was away from Los Angeles, to try and establish himself as a writer. And for that, I think it's a very worthwhile book. Just say that right off the top. And there's lots of very nice passages, very poignant passages, very accurate from my own experience, passages about the joys and trials and vicissitudes of trying to get a foot in the writing game. So just that right off the top, I think it's an excellent book at that level. So it's about the third or fourth time I've read it, so I know it pretty well.
Okay. I found it interesting, being from LA myself, wanting to be a writer myself, although there's been a hitch in those plans along the way. But I found it realistic about the LA landscape. A lot of echoes of James M. Cain and Raymond Chandler. And I haven't read Bukowski in a while, but I'm assuming his style and his portrayal of Los Angeles is similar to Bukowski. Is that not correct?
They're definitely different writers. And I wouldn't say that the Fante prose is something you can see in Bukowski's prose. If Bukowski had not made a big deal out of Fante, talking about him in a couple of his novels, and I think also in Ham on Rye, discovering him at the Los Angeles Public Library when he was a kid, feeling like an outcast, trying to become a writer himself, and not really meeting up with any writers that he identified with. Hemingway was an exception. Sherwood Anderson was an exception. And Fante was an exception. Talks about how Fante, in my version of it, this is a reissue of Ask the Dust. Bukowski writes the preface to it. And he said, Fante was my god, my literary god. And if Bukowski hadn't done all this pointing and signaling, you wouldn't know it, except for the milieu, because this is Bunker Hill in 1939, just about the very year that Bukowski was living on Bunker Hill, too. So I can understand Bukowski's identification with it. It's good, solid writing. It's a guy precisely in Bukowski's position in that very year of 39, 40, 41, who was trying to become a writer and living on Bunker Hill. Of course, Bukowski's going to identify with it. Yeah. Of course. Yeah. Doesn't mean I have to. Doesn't mean I have to at any other level apart from the wanting to become a writer. I think Bukowski's prose is better than Fante's. I think it's sharper. I think it's got more punch. I think it's more humorous. I think it's more ironic. I think it's even more concerned with his environment and with other people than Fante in this book is. It's just a very solipsistic, narcissistic view of a projection of everything that he's feeling onto others, pretty much. That's a very broad generalization, but in contrast to Bukowski, who is actually, you would maybe be inclined to call him a narcissist, a solipsist, an egoist. Well, he is an egoist, but he is actually interested in other people. He writes long chapters about his teachers, about the coaches in high school, about his friends. Fante doesn't seem that interested in other people, to tell you the truth. He really doesn't. He seems interested in John Fante and grandstanding as this great writer. And that's kind of fun, Apparently Fante was this kind of little Italian guy, maybe 5'2", 3'4", really a little guy. And so you can just imagine this kind of little Italian guy, feeling a little bit alienated maybe from the white Anglo-Saxon LA of the day. He was born in Denver, came from Colorado. So that's kind of fun, just imagining that, this little guy, blowing his own horn about what a great writer he is and everything. But that's what's a little bit off-putting about Us the Dusk, I think. He's not really interested in other people. They're all just a projection screen for his own fantasies, his own megalomaniacal imagination about becoming this great writer at some point. And I'll just throw this in. I mean, you get on the Wikipedia page, they quote Bukowski, what a great writer he is, how Fante was his god. Then you have Robert Towne, the screenwriter for Chinatown, which I don't even like the movie, by the way. Take that, Robert Towne. Don't even like the movie. Think it's jumbled. Stole our great-great-uncle's story about Mulholland and the water and transposed it to the 30s to make it cooler so they could wear their snap-brim fedoras. Don't like it. Next to that, Robert Towne says it's the greatest LA novel. I have to laugh. I can name 3 right off the bat that I think are greater LA novels, and they all belong to Raymond Chandler. How do you like that? The Big Sleep, also 1939, Farewell, My Lovely, and The Little Sister. We've talked about those. I don't have to go through it again. But another great LA novel in the very year of 1939, once again, would be The Day of the Locust by Nathaniel West. Okay, and Nathaniel West is interested in other people. He's interested in describing the losers, the outsiders, the fringe elements of Hollywood / LA society, as does Fante. But he cuts a wider swath. Fante's just in this little world of Bunker Hill. He's got his Mexican girlfriend, sometime girlfriend Camila Lopez. He's got this other girl he has a little affair with called Vera Rifkin. And this other fellow, I'm just naming the characters right now in the novel. It's a very limited cast of characters. We're talking about Us the Dust now by John Fante. I'm kind of jumping around. Sammy Wiggins, who wants to become a writer. He's also vying for the attentions of this Mexican waitress, Camila Lopez. And another main character is a fellow by the name of J.C. Hackmuth. Looking at it here, Hackmuth, Hackmuth, who is a stand-in for H.L. Mencken, because Mencken published Fante's first story, and I think maybe a couple others, helped him out to get his first novel published, which was Wait Until Spring Bandini, 1938, Ask the Dust, 1939. But it's a very constricted circle of characters. And I much prefer those authors I already mentioned, West and Chandler, as well as Schulberg, Bud Schulberg and his What Makes Sammy Run. Another great Hollywood/LA novel. And as I argued in our podcast about The Little Sister, Chandler's great 1949 novel with his inimitable detective Philip Marlowe, I think Hollywood is LA writ large. Okay, so when you're doing a Hollywood novel, almost just by default, it becomes a Los Angeles novel because of all the ambition, the celebrity, the glamour, the self-promotion, all that sort of thing. So I think it's a nice novel. I'm kind of cutting to the chase here, just giving you my verdict on it. I think it's a nice novel. I like the part about him becoming a writer. Every would-be writer can relate to. It's a lot of fun. And he does describe, the place where he lives nicely. He makes a trip to Long Beach, experiences the Long Beach earthquake of 1933. That's kind of an interesting little historical anecdote. Laguna Beach briefly. And that's all to the good. But if you're going to get a real, a larger LA novel that covers a little bit more ground, I think you can't do any better than one of those three Chandler novels I mentioned, because, as I said, it's social history. You have Philip Marlowe in his car meeting with the upper classes, meeting with the lower classes, meeting with the middle classes, going cross town to Santa Monica, Bunker Hill, wherever it might be. This is not the great LA novel, Mr. Town. This is maybe the great Bunker Hill novel, the great inner city Depression era LA novel. But the great LA novel, I'm sorry, we must agree to disagree. So that off the top.
In reading about 2/3 of it, I never figured out what the title might refer to. Ask the Dust. Is there a specific meaning to that?
I didn't know it either. It's like Bukowski's Ham on Rye. Where does this come from? It's not something you run across in the Saint, what's it called? The King James version of the Bible. Hemingway took a couple titles from that, or in Bartlett's Familiar Quotations, or anything like that. I read Wikipedia. That's where I get a lot of my info. It said that this was taken from a book by Knut Hamsun, or Knut Hamsun, Hamsun. He was a Norwegian writer or Danish, I'm not sure. But anyway, Fante was a big fan of his. And there's a line in one of Hamsun's book that is Ask the Dust. Ask the Dust. It's referring to why the main character in the novel should be loving this certain woman. Makes no sense. Ask the leaves on the trees. Ask the wind. Ask the dust. That kind of thing. So it's a nice title. Very enigmatic.
Poetic.
Yeah. Because actually, it doesn't make sense why this Arturo Bandini and this Camila Lopez should be so enamored of each other. It's a really sadistic relationship. It starts off very badly. They insult each other in the restaurant. He calls her, I don't know what he calls her exactly, but some epithet for Mexican, an epithet or two. She throws an epithet or two at him for being Italian. It's not a loving relationship, and it's back and forth, off and on. And it's sort of a puzzle. There's a puzzle at the heart of this novel, why they should be drawn to each other and have anything to do with each other, actually. That's one of my problems with it. I can't actually comprehend what what the draw is, but you could maybe rationalize it by saying, well, Camila Lopez, she's impressed that he writes. He's a writer, but she isn't. She's not impressed by the stuff he shows her, or the telegrams he writes her, or the love letters. She tears them up, throws them away, is disdainful, and she's apparently beautiful, but that's it. Otherwise, she's a mess. She later becomes a marijuana addict, and can be rather nasty in her own right, and has another love interest, this Sammy Wiggins, who also works at the restaurant. And the book is not completely satisfying for me. It reminded me a lot of Kafka, reading it. Sort of, kind of, you're not going anywhere really. It's just back and forth. He goes back and forth from his dump of an apartment to this Columbia buffet, which is where Camilla works as a waitress, back and forth here and there, doing his writing, publishing this, publishing that, on getting a novel out. Okay, that's fun. I like the writerly stuff, but the love relationship and the kind of the world he inhabits, it reminded me of Kafka. It was kind of gray. It didn't do much for me. There didn't seem to be much plot progress. There was it's sort of like an endless circle of you're kind of on a repeat with this thing, and it's a good novel. It's good writing again. That's for sure. But when people, for example, I knew his son through correspondence. We had a little correspondence at one time. His son, Don Fante, who was a writer in his own right, didn't really start writing, published his first book at 54. Later on in life, he started writing. Died at 71, so I had a very short period of writing, but he published a lot in that period. And he wrote the introduction to his father's Wait Until Spring Bandini, which is the first novel he published in 1938. And his son, Don Fante, wrote the introduction to it. And I like Don Fante. I'll just tell you the brief story. We had a publisher in England, and the guy wasn't really coming across with my book. He wasn't really publishing it. Small publishing house. He was getting copies out, but it wasn't really out there. And I wrote Dan Fante, who was a fellow American who had the book published by this British publisher, small publisher. And I said, hey, Dan, do you have any trouble with this guy? It seems he's telling me he's going to get my book out, but I've got a few copies, but I don't see it really out there. I'm not sure about him. And Dan wrote me back, and he said, well, Kevin, I really can't help you because it's been 3 years and I still haven't gotten a royalty check from this guy. So it gives you a little insight into how tough it is sometimes at the small publishing house level when you're not a big name author. Even Dan Fante having trouble. Anyway, but Dan writes, and he's his son, and he loves his father and he respects him and is impressed with him. But he writes here, Dan, in the introduction, my father's prose was brilliant. He should have had the literary reputation of a Hemingway or a Steinbeck or a Soroyan, but fate conspired to deal him a pair of deuces, not a fistful of kings. Okay, Dan, I appreciate that, but I don't agree. I don't think you can mention John Fante in the same breath with Hemingway, Soroyan, or Steinbeck. For one thing, he didn't write that much. He wrote Wait Until Spring Bandini, 1938. He was born in 1909, okay, so he's not yet 30, 1938. He wrote Ask the Dusk in 1939, so he's 30, and he publishes his second novel, very good one, Ask the Dusk. I started Wait Until Spring Bandini. I couldn't get through it. Just didn't grab me. Doesn't mean it's bad. I didn't get through it. And then he had a book of short stories, I believe, called Day Go Red in 1940. Well, then he doesn't publish anything until 1952, called Full of Life. And then in 1970, he published something with a fellow named Rudolph Bourchier, called Bravo Burrow. And then in 1977, he came out with something called The Brotherhood of the Grape. And then in 1982, he published Dreams from Bunker Hill. It was kind of a sequel to Ask the Dusk with the same hero, Arturo Bandini. There are actually two other novels with Arturo Bandini as the protagonist. His first novel, Wait Until Spring, Bandini, and then a novel called The Road to Los Angeles, which he actually wrote in 1936. I think it was his first novel that he wrote, but then it was only published posthumously in 1985. Fante died in 1983, I believe. And so that's that. So after he'd published 3 books, 2 novels, 1 collection of short stories, at the age of 31, he seemed to have stopped publishing. And he didn't publish anything until 1952, Full of Life. And then nothing until 18 years later, 1970, Bravo Burrow, which was a collaborative effort. So he didn't publish that much. And then these last 2 things toward the end of his life. What was he doing? Well, he was in the Hollywood industry writing screenplays. He was writing screenplays where he could make money. I understand that. He had a place in Malibu, had a nice place in Malibu, had 4 kids, had a nice life, apparently, according to his son, Dan, and this little introduction. So, well, not to be felt sorry for at all, but I can't take him seriously as a great writer. All these people touting him as this great writer, Bukowski, Dan Fante, his son, Robert Town. I don't buy it. He's a good writer, but he's not a great writer. And if he was a great writer, I argue he would have kept writing, at a fairly decent clip. But he just stopped to earn money in Hollywood. Okay, fine, great, but not a great writer.
Okay. Are there any passages from the book that you find to be noteworthy that you'd like to point out?
Yeah, I like the writing stuff, as I said. For example, it's just funny because he has these delusions of grandeur,
Yeah.
He's talking about how I guess we're in 1933 because the earthquake, the Long Beach earthquake he describes took place in 1933.
Yeah.
So that would make Fante, born 1909, 24 years old. So Arturo Bandini, his alter ego, has published this short story called The Little Dog Laughed. And he's going around showing it to everyone. Hey, Little Dog Laughed. Look, this is a great story. It's comical, I mean, I remember I got my first short story published, but I was, not doing that. But I guess when you're 24, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, he's going around showing to everybody, and he's putting out copies in the lobby of the hotel he lives in, and no one seems to be reading it. He says it was a story about their own Middle West, about Colorado and a snowstorm. And there they were with their uprooted souls and sunburned faces, dying in a blazing desert. And the cool homelands from whence they came were so near at hand, right there in the pages of that little magazine. And I thought, ah, well, it was ever thus. Poe, Whitman, Heine, Dreiser, and now Bandini. Thinking that, I was not so hurt, not so lonely. So you get this 25-year-old kid, he's putting himself in the same league with Poe, Whitman, and Dreiser. It's funny, And what is very Los Angeles about this novel, and he alludes to it there, is that all these people in this hotel he was living in, it's a hotel or it's an apartment building, I'm not sure, I think it's maybe an apartment building, that they're all from the Middle West, right? They're from Kansas City, they're from Memphis, they're from Indiana, Ohio. And that's what I said was sort of the definition of a Los Angeles novel when I was talking about one of Chandler's novels, namely The Little Sister. That a Los Angeles novel is a novel where they are all the main characters are from somewhere else. Even Marlowe's from somewhere else. He's not from LA originally. So that's very good. He got that. And So I like that. And there's other passages. I'll give you one more. Try and show you the humor. The stuff I really did like. Let's see. Oh yeah. So after he gets The Little Dog Laugh published, he gets a new short story published, and these short stories are being published by J.C. Hockmuth. Again, the alias of H.L. Mencken. He's getting these things published in the American Mercury, I guess, which was Mencken's main periodical that he edited. Then my new story hit the magazine stands. The Long Lost Hills is the title. It was not as exciting as The Little Dog Laughed. I scarcely looked at the free copy Hockmuth sent me. This pleased me nevertheless. Someday I would have so many stories written I wouldn't remember where they appeared. Hi there, Bandini. Nice story you had in the Atlantic Monthly this month. Bandini puzzled. Did I have one in the Atlantic? Well. So he's just imagining all these scenarios where he's this great famous writer. And there's also, it's not only the fruits of writing that he's imagining he will come to enjoy and savor at some point. But he talks about the joys of writing when it's really going good. And let me see if I can't find one of those. This might be it here. Pardon me, folks. I do apologize when I go into these long pauses. Okay, here we go. So he's got a new idea for a novel, and he gets it from this relationship he has with this other woman, not Camila Lopez, but a brief liaison he has with a woman named Vera Rifkin. And he says, the good days, the fat days, page upon page of manuscript, prosperous days, something to say, the story of Vera Rifkin, and the pages mounted, and I was happy. Fabulous days, the rent paid, still $50 in my wallet, nothing to do all day and night but write and think of writing. Ah, such sweet days, to see it grow, to worry for it, myself, my book, my words, maybe important, maybe timeless, but mine nevertheless. The indomitable Arturo Bandini, already deep into his first novel. Okay, so it's just fun. This little Italian kid, just having these imaginings of greatness, but really describing quite well how the satisfactions of writing when the writing is going well. Nothing can put you off. Actually, I've had that feeling. In fact, I tell my girlfriend, after I've done my stint in the morning, usually do it 2, 3, 4 hours, whatever, and it went well, and then I tell her it's already a good day. It's already a good day. Throw anything my way, I'm going to be able to take it on the chin. So he describes that very nicely, that feeling.
Okay. And I noticed when I was reading it that there's a lot of Catholic references. He brings in the Catholic faith quite a bit. Any thought? I know, and you've told me you are a Catholic writer. Last week you told me that on the video that you should be considered a Catholic writer because you've been baptized as a Catholic, and your main character goes to some Catholic schools. So I don't know how serious you are in that label, but I'm wondering what you think of the Catholic elements in the Fante.
Well, I think if you have a Catholic upbringing, which I did, most definitely. I went to Catholic schools except for 2 years of college, every year of my school life. So even if you are maybe not a practicing Catholic, and I'm not a churchgoer, all right? Full disclosure here, everybody. But that has to seep into you. I mean, it must. Call it indoctrination, call it spiritual training, call it catechism, what you will. But as someone calls Henry James an American writer, even if he spent all his adult life abroad in Europe and mostly in England, you can call me a Catholic writer. Yeah. I have spent all the rest of my adult life abroad, as it were, as maybe a lapsed or fallen, what you want to call it, at least not a church-going Catholic. But as you can call Henry James an American writer, you can certainly call me a Catholic writer. I was raised in the system, okay? So that's got to come out in some way or another, even if only in opposition to it all, right? You got a chip on your shoulder about it, right?
Yeah.
So, not that I do, but just as an example, it will come out in one form or another, I would argue. I mean, they call guys Jewish writers like Philip Roth. They don't go to temple. I mean, they don't go to, as far as I know, I think he was maybe even an atheist. Don't quote me on that, but there are plenty of so-called Jewish writers who, they're not even believers in a deity. Okay, that's safe to say. So that's my case for, yeah. I didn't say it jokingly last time. It's like, I am actually, you can call me a Catholic writer. I don't approach Catholic themes, but maybe obliquely, and maybe to spite myself.
What about the Catholic elements in the Fante work? Did you find those interesting or compelling, or just?
I didn't find them interesting or compelling. I found them comical again. Whenever he's desperate, he prays to Our Lady or whatever he does, says his rosary. It's kind of, I mean, I don't mean to make light of Catholicism, but it's a comical element in his hands, it seems to me. Yeah. How he sort of, he will, whenever he's tearing his hair and gnashing his teeth, and then the last thing he does when push comes to shove, he then falls to his knees and prays.
Right.
It's like, and that's his training. He's an Italian, Catholic, and that's in his blood.
Yes. He, in my opinion, as being a devout Catholic myself, it seemed like he was mostly respectful of the Catholic faith, the way he talked about it. Mostly.
No, certainly. Absolutely. No, he wasn't. I found it comical, but he wasn't joking. His character Arturo Bandini is not joking.
Right. But there was one passage in which I was taken aback. He seemed to just have this Catholic element, and being an Italian back in the 30s, of course they're going to have a strong Catholic background. Right. So it's understandable how he'd weave that in, and I felt it was done respectfully, and as a devout Catholic, I appreciated that quite a bit. Until this passage. Listen to this.
Okay.
I thought, wait a minute. Now we're talking blasphemy. Check this out.
Okay, go ahead.
I went down to the end of the hall to the landing of the fire escape, and there I let go, crying and unable to stop, because God was such a dirty crook, such a contemptible skunk. That's what he was for doing that thing to that woman. She had this terrible wound on her thigh or whatever.
Yes. Yeah.
Come down out of the skies, you God. Come on down, and I'll hammer your face all over the city of Los Angeles, you miserable, unpardonable prankster. If it wasn't for you, this woman would not be so maimed, and neither would the world. And if it wasn't for you, I could have had Camilla Lopez down at the beach. But no, you have to play your tricks. See what you have done to this woman and to the love of Arturo Bandini for Camilla Lopez. And then my tragedy seemed greater than the woman's, and I forgot her.
Well, see, I find that humorous, and I don't find it blasphemous. It's just a guy at the end of his rope, and if you think he's serious about those threats to God, come down here, I'll smash your face, or whatever he says. Then he is a true believer. Obviously, he's biblical. He's Job.
Yes, I guess you have a point there. I was just talking to our mother about that lately, about how in the Jewish tradition they often challenge God and
all the time
and fight with him. The name Israel. The name Israel means literally in Hebrew, he who struggles with God, because Jacob fought the angel. And then Jacob fought the angel, and then the angel afterward changed his name to Israel, meaning he who fights with God.
Well, so you could very well argue that Arturo Bandini is in a proud Old Testament tradition.
Correct. Although my point is, I told our mother about this. She told me, look, this happens in the Old Testament. But I think in the Catholic world, we don't think fighting and struggling with God isn't
No,
necessary. It's more a Jewish kind of belief.
but it's a very natural human reaction. You
Okay.
know, don't you think? I mean, one. I mean, we don't have to get into a theological discussion, but
Hmm.
I should think that someone who is a true believer and depends on God, you know, for everything, including their salvation,
Yeah.
that when it doesn't come their way, they might be a little bit ticked, and they might want to shake their fist in his face.
I
I
got
think
you.
that's a very human reaction.
Right. Okay. I see what you're saying. Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
And this, and what I like about Antero Bandini, I've been saying a lot of negative things about the book, but I'm not
Yeah.
really negative about the book. I'm just trying to counterweight the Towns and Bukowskis and all these people who think this is just the greatest, one of the greatest novels of the 20th century and the greatest Los Angeles novel. I'm trying to counterbalance them. What I like about this Antero Bandini, he's a very passionate fellow. Yes, I mean he believes strongly, he disbelieves strongly, he hates with passion, he loves with passion. That's what I like about the character.
Yeah. Very passionate character throughout the novel. Yeah. And there's one other passage I'm looking for here. I've put quite a few post-it notes, so I'm not able to find the exact one. Okay, here's an interesting one. The when they You mentioned the earthquake in 1933 in Long Beach.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm assuming he must have really experienced that, or is he reading himself into that?
I don't know. I know he was in Wilmington, down near Long Beach. He worked in Wilmington,
Oh,
but I can't tell you exactly.
this is very interesting. This is a very interesting passage. He has just had his little physical liaison with Vera Rifkin.
Mm-hmm.
And as he's leaving her house, or some point right around that time, it says, suddenly I felt a rumble, then a roar. The stone bench fell away from me and thumped into the sand. I looked at the row of concessions. They were shaking and cracking. I looked beyond to the Long Beach skyline. The tall buildings were swaying. Under me, the sand gave way. I staggered, found safer footing. It happened again. It was an earthquake. Now there were screams, then dust, then crumbling and roaring. I turned round and round in a circle. I had done this. I had done this. I stood with my mouth open, paralyzed, looking about me. I ran a few steps toward the sea. Then I ran back. You did it, Arturo. This is the wrath of God. You did it.
Yeah. By the way,
And he
I marked.
and let me finish one more part. The,
Yeah.
the rumbling continued like a carpet over oil. The sea and land heaved. Dust rose. Somewhere I heard a booming of debris. I heard screams and then a siren. People running out of doors. Great clouds of dust. You did it, Arturo. Up in that room on that bed. You did it. So
Yeah.
he's,
That's
he's
what. That's what.
he, so he's
I just
seeing
want
the
to say.
earthquake as kind of a punishment for his adulterous liaison there.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I just want to say I marked the very same passage, Jim.
There you
It,
go.
and the words I wrote were, how egotistical can you get? What a solipsistic, narcissistic writer. Perfect and funny. Right. So yeah, I mean, this is your classic writer. I mean, all writers to a large degree are egotists because they think that the world is holding its breath to read what they have committed to paper, right? Now, you may be modest about it, you may be humble about it, but deep down, you're an egotist to believe that, right? You don't have to be a jerk, right, in your
Yeah,
personality,
right.
but that's just a beautiful illustration of how deep that egotism goes. He thinks that he has caused this earthquake as divine retribution for his sin.
I
so
think
yeah,
it's a nice passage.
I said he wasn't as funny as Bukowski, but in maybe even unintentional ways, I find it hilarious, this book.
Right. Okay. And any other passages of note, as long as
There is one of note, which is, there are touching passages. Okay.
Yeah.
I wasn't brought to tears, but there is one that reminded me of Mice and Men.
Oh.
With you maybe marked the same one. I don't know, maybe if you didn't get that far, but it's no, I'm sure you didn't get that far. It's page 177 toward the very end. And it reminded me of Mice and Men. It's like Lenny, right before George is about to shoot him.
Okay.
And tell me about the rabbits, George, right?
Yeah.
Which every time I see that in a movie or read that passage, that does bring tears to my eyes. It really does.
It's a very poignant scene.
Even just telling you about it, I'm starting to get a little bit teary, so I'll stop.
Yeah.
There's a little passage that's reminiscent of that.
Okay.
So it was a bit of a, could have been a tearjerker in the right circumstances. This Camila Lopez, with whom he has this very strange affair, like I said, kind of sadistic, back and forth. You're not really clear on what is the draw between these people, at least long term. She becomes a pothead in the true sense of the term. She just becomes addicted to marijuana.
Okay.
And she's useless. And he wants to get her out of Los Angeles, away from her pusher on Central Avenue. And he drives her down to Laguna Beach. Well, on the way there, they just before they get there, they go to a place where they got dogs, some place where they got dogs to buy. And a dog, I said, this is Arturo Bandini speaking, and a dog, I said, I'll get you a little dog, a little pup, a Scotty, and we'll call him Willie. She clapped her hands. Oh, Willie, she said, here, Willie. And a cat, I said, a Siamese cat, we'll call him Chang, a big cat with golden eyes. She shivered and covered her face with her hands. No, she said, I hate cats. Okay, no cats. I hate them too. That's funny. He pulls himself up short of the point where it's getting a little bit too George and Lenny and tell me about the rabbits, right? He pulls himself up short. But I looked to see when Of Mice and Men was published, 1937, 2 years before this, right? I can imagine reading that in 1937, he dashes the book off and he gets a little scene that's reminiscent of it. Who knows? But anyway, that's an example of a little bit of a poignant passage. Fante is good at those, and he's also funny. Okay, he can be quite funny, right? So there you have it.
Well, also one other aspect that I appreciated on him, as you know, I'm with my kind of Catholic academy I try to run. I try to avoid graphic sexual things in my own writing or in things I read, and I appreciated the way he spoke of this affair with Camilla, with Vera Rifkin. Here we go. There were no scars and no desiccated place. She was Camilla, complete and lovely. She belonged to me. He's imagining Vera Rifkin is Camilla because he loves Camilla. He happens to be with her. She belonged to me, and so did the world, and I was glad for her tears. They thrilled me and lifted me, and I possessed her. Then I slept, serenely weary, remembering vaguely through the mist of drowsiness that she was sobbing, but I didn't care. She wasn't Camilla anymore. She was Vera Rifkin, and I was in her apartment, and I would get up and leave just as soon as I had some sleep. So all he said for the sexual part was, then I possessed her. And in my opinion, that's all you need.
I marked the same passage, Tim. Yeah. Really?
I see a theme developing here, marking the same.
I was drawn to that too. And I was also drawn to the foreplay, as it were, where it's role playing in order to get them both in the mood.
Okay.
Where she's asking, this Vera Rifkin is asking, what is her name? Camilla, I said. She sat up, touched my mouth. I'm so lonely, she said. Pretend that I am she. Yes, I said, that's it. That's your name. It's Camilla. I opened my arms and she sank against my chest. My name is Camilla, she said. You're beautiful, I said. You're a Mayan princess. I am Princess Camilla. All of this land and the sea belongs to you, Camilla. All of California. There is no California, no Los Angeles, no dusty streets, no cheap hotels, no stinking newspapers, no broken, uprooted people from the east, no fancy boulevards. This is your beautiful land with the desert and the mountains and the sea. You're a princess and you reign over it all. I am Princess Camilla, she sobbed. There are no Americans and no California, only deserts and mountains and the sea. I reign over it all. Then I come, says Bandini. Then you come, she says. I'm myself. I'm Arturo Bandini. I'm the greatest writer the world ever had. Ah, yes, she choked. Of course, Arturo Bandini, the genius of the earth. She buried her face in my shoulder and her warm tears fell on my throat. I held her closer. Kiss me, Arturo. But I didn't kiss her. I wasn't through. It had to be my way or nothing. I'm a conqueror, I said. I'm like Cortez, only I'm Italian. I felt it now. It was real and satisfying, and joy broke through me. The blue sky through the window was a ceiling. The whole living world was a small thing in the palm of my hand. I shivered with delight. Camilla, I love you so much. And then we pick up with your passage. But you see, they're stoking themselves up to do the deed.
Right. Play your role here.
It's funny. It's very funny. And again, we get that part about him being the greatest writer on earth. He has to feel this. He has to have this affirmation from this woman that he's going to bed. But in order to do it, he needs to hear, you're great, and you're the Mayan princess. It's this role played before maybe even the term was coined. And as I'm getting into the passages, you see, I did indeed like the book, right? And I guess the negative comments at the start should have been maybe placed toward the end. You should probably start with positive things to say as opposed to negative, because I don't mean to put this book down. I don't. Okay. I did enjoy it for the third or fourth time.
Kev, on the cover of my version, it has a quote from the New York Times that says the following: either the work of John Fante is unknown to you or it is unforgettable. He was not the kind of writer to leave room in between.
What's that mean?
It means you either, well, as it says, either the work of John Fante is unknown to you or it is unforgettable. That basically means a lot of people don't know of this guy, but of those who do, they all find his work unforgettable. Would you agree with that statement?
No, I don't find it unforgettable. That, again, wants to put him in the Parnassus with Melville and Hemingway and Fitzgerald and the like.
Hawthorne.
He's not. He didn't write enough. He became a screenplay writer, and he wrote enough that I can say I like him, and I can see why Bukowski was quite enamored of him.
Well, but about his screenplays,
he's on the second level. He's on the second level.
Okay. I read the list of his screenplays. There were like 7 of them. I never heard of any of those movies. So that might be something to mention as well. None of his screenplays became anything major that I know of.
Right. He was no Ben Hecht. And when I say he was on the second level, I'm not saying I'm better than him or I'm on any level, but we're talking about in terms of the greats. And I think this podcast is necessary, to tell you the truth, as a corrective. We got to calm people down. He's very good. He's funny. He's touching, but he's not on the Olympus. He can be Bukowski's God, but he's not on Mount Olympus.
Another writer that came to mind as I was reading his book is Jack Kerouac, On the Road. Kind of a zany, wacky sensibility.
I agree. Okay. There's affinity. Yeah, I agree. And there's and the prose is kind of invertebrate. You know what I mean?
Without a spine in it, then.
Yeah, I mean, Kerouac goes on for pages. That was his whole method. Have an endless roll of typewriting paper that he would just type and not even have to change paper, so he wouldn't have his flow interrupted. And that's how it is when you read On the Road. And I think On the Road is probably one of the great overrated novels in American literature. I went back to it recently, and I remember kind of liking it, but not much. And so I do give books a second chance, right? And I went back to it recently. I couldn't get past the first 2 or 3 pages. It's just not my cup of tea. And
it's written
probably is my cup of tea for the various reasons I've enumerated already. But it has the same sort of invertebrate, sort of soft quality. It's not cold and hard and clear and ventilated.
Right.
Like I like my prose, like Chandler and Kane and Bukowski.
Right. Okay. I have not read On the Road, but I believe I've read excerpts of it, and it strikes me as being kind of a stream of consciousness.
Right.
Right. And there's a little bit of the stream of consciousness feel to the Fante novel.
That's right. He's not disciplined. He's not a disciplined writer insofar. I mean, Bukowski, that passage I read last week about him going to the prom dance and pressing his nose up against the window and seeing all these lovely, unscarred children, and he was with his, his pockmarked and scarred and pimply face and like a jungle animal drawn to the light. There's some real punch there. There's something really going on there. And his sentences are very disciplined, sentence period, new thought. He corrects himself, okay, good, but someday I would have something that they didn't have. There was a falseness about it. But then I said again, I will, someday be as happy as you. And Fante does that, but it's not. It doesn't quite have the punch of a Bukowski. I don't know why. I just can't. It's hard to say, but there is sort of a Kerouac kinship there, and I'm sorry. I like Jack Kerouac as a personality. I really do, but I can't read On the Road. I'm sorry. I just can't get through it. And there's other things I like. I like Big Sur. Big Sur I read of his. I like that. It's shorter. That helps. And it's kind of funny. It's about a writer, Kerouac, who's trying to get out of San Francisco and get some real writing done. And he goes out to Big Sur, and then his whole crowd of, followers and buddies and fellow writers, they all follow him there. He can't get any writing done there. So it's kind of funny, the whole premise. And somehow the writing's a little more sharp in Big Sur. I think it was like 62 he published that, and On the Road was 57.
Okay.
So maybe he developed, writers can develop. You don't have to judge them by their first, second, or third books. That's often unfair. But apparently this is his great masterpiece, and so I'm judging his great masterpiece, and I don't see it as a masterpiece in any way.
Okay. All right, fair enough. We've got about 3 or 4 minutes left. Do you have any final thoughts?
It's tough. Go ahead.
It says here on my book that Ask the Dusk is now a major motion picture. Have you ever seen it?
Yeah, Robert Towne, again, this guy thinks it's the greatest Los Angeles novel. He wrote the screenplay for something. I think it came out in 2007 or so. It starred Colin Farrell. I haven't seen it. Maybe the movie's good. I mean, I hope it's good. Do justice to the book, which is a good book. I will say this to end off with. There's a book by Fante, which he published the year before his death, called Dreams from Bunker Hill. And as I mentioned earlier, it's a sequel, sort of the continuation of Ask the Dust. Apparently, I don't know, I forget. I read it many years ago. I checked it out at the John F. Kennedy Library in West Berlin. And I remember loving it. So again, this was a year before his death. Apparently, he wasn't writing at that point. He had diabetes. He had a couple of legs amputated. It was a very tragic story. He was blind toward the end of his life. And he dictated it to his wife. And I found this, Dreams from Bunker Hill, hilarious. And I was thinking to myself, well, maybe he's read a little bit of Bukowski in the meantime. Writers do this sort of thing. It's like I said, Kane might have read a little bit of Chandler in the meantime to get that very detailed description of the living room in the first chapter of Mildred Pierce, because Chandler was very known for that and good at that, describing interiors of buildings and exteriors. Had an eye for that. So maybe I had the thought at the time, I recall, because I was on a Bukowski kick back then, and I had gotten to Dreams from Bunker Hill from reading Ask the Dust for the first time. And I remember reading Dreams from Bunker Hill, 1982, year before his death. This is 43 years after Ask the Dust. And I remember liking it much, much more. It was sharper. It had more punch, and it had more humor. And I thought, well, maybe he's read Bukowski in the meantime. And Bukowski, in the meantime, had become his friend a few years before his death. And I thought, well, he's been reading Bukowski. I bet you. So it reminded me of Bukowski. I liked it much better. And, well, you see, that's the nice thing about literature sometimes. You could, two writers of some prominence can rub off on each other in good ways. And we're all the better for it, the readership.
Are you familiar with the poem called Fante by Charles Bukowski?
Maybe. Read it to me.
I have it here in the back of my book. I'll just read it to finish off our session.
Yeah, great.
Let's see. It's hard to see. Every now and then it comes back to me. Him in bed there blind, being slowly chopped away, the little bulldog. The nurses passing through, pulling at curtains, blind sheets, seeing if he was still alive. The Colorado kid, the courage of the American Mercury, Mencken's Catholic bad boy, gone Hollywood and tossed up on shore, being chopped away, chop, chop, chop until he was gone. He never knew he would be famous. I wonder if he would have given a DAMN. I think he would have. John, you're big time now. You've entered the books of forever, right there with Dostoevsky, Tolstoy, and your boy Sherwood Anderson. I told you, and you said you wouldn't lie to an old blind man, would you? Ah, no need for that, bulldog.
Well, you see, he finally got, or Arturo Bandini in Ask the Dust finally got what he wanted. Eternal fame. Because his fame seems assured, at least in the context of LA writers. He's established himself. Again, I think he's of the second rank, but who cares what I have to say? I'm glad that people like him and enjoy him and elevate him into the first rank of LA authors or people writing about LA. So I'm more than pleased for him. And it just shows you the luck involved. And Bukowski always talked about luck. How as a writer, you got to be lucky.
All right.
And Dan Fante, in the introduction to, again, this edition of Wait Until Spring, Bandini, his father's first novel, 1938, 1 year before Ask the Dust, 1939, he talks about how his father had bad luck, right? It's a long story, but anyway, and I don't buy that. His father stopped writing at a certain point to do screenplays, to earn filthy lucre in Hollywood. So that was his decision. It's not bad luck, but there is good luck, I would argue. And Bukowski gave it to him just by talking about him in the 70s, and his star arose once more. And he is now in the Parnassus of great LA writers. So good for him. But again, that shows you the breaks, shows you the little breaks you need to get into this canon that we all have, in our own minds, or, officially on the syllabi of English literature profs.
Oh, by the way, I just wanted to say I did change one word in that poem. He had an S word in there, and I used the word, I wouldn't lie to you. Instead, I wouldn't S you. I just wanted to make sure we knew that I changed that, because I don't want to change anyone's original words unless I mention it. And one more thing is, as I read this book, this will be our final thing here.
Okay.
I did see you as part of a continuum from Fante's Ask the Dusk to Bukowski's Ham on Rye to your LA Kid. I think it fits in that canon right there. That's my personal opinion.
Well, give me one reason why you think that.
Your book is very well written. It's more readable than most. It's got that kind of individual, it's got a spine to it, as you say, and it's got an individual man's point of view as an LA writer, as an authentic LA writer. So and in general, it seems like you could be seen as a successor to Fante and Bukowski. It depends on the critic, but I thought you did quite well in that vein.
Well, thanks. I appreciate that. Well, the thing I do want to get across in whatever I write is a very personal view of things.
That's right.
I'm not a product of some creative writing course in Iowa, you know. I'm not part of this homogenized, mushy sort of style that people have these days, a style that I would argue you can't distinguish one from the next. I mean, when was the last time you picked up a book and you opened it and said, this writer writes like no one I've ever encountered before, complete and unique unto his self or herself? You can't do it, hardly ever. And I'm hoping that there is a distinct personality which comes across in my work. And if that's the case, then you're right. I would gladly be lumped.
We shall see in the next, as your work becomes better. Well, as your work becomes better known in the next 5 to 10 years, we'll start seeing where people place it. But I think it certainly is part of that line of that legacy of American, actually, I mean, not American, Los Angeles writing.
Right.
All right, brother.
Well, thanks. I appreciate it. Well, I've read enough of these guys to maybe have had something rub off, and that is all to the good then. Fine. Let me say, yeah.
Yeah, we got your main influences are James M. Cain, Raymond Chandler, Charles Bukowski. I don't know that Fante is an influence for your writing, but I can say that you have elements of all those writers in your book, but you also have your own unique voice. I want to emphasize that.
Okay. No, I appreciate it very much, Jim. Thank you very much. That's what every writer who's worth his salt should be striving for. Unfortunately, I don't see much of it these days. I think people are a little bit scared of having such a idiosyncratic and unique narrator voice,
right,
that it might seem weird to people, right?
Right.
One tip to writers, and we'll finish with this.
Okay.
Never be prey to the fear of being seen as weird, okay? It can only work to your advantage.
Okay.
All right.
Although I don't see anything weird in your writing, but I do see some stuff that is unique.
Kooky. There's kooky aspects.
Yes. Unique, kooky, and weird. Whatever of those three terms you want to use, go for it. All right, Kevin.
It's LA kooky is what it is.
LA kooky. There's a kookiness about LA.
Yeah, well, you're right. That's where I'm from, and I think LA gives you kind of an oblique angle of refraction on things that other parts of the world don't quite give you. We can maybe elaborate on that next podcast, but we've gone over time already.
Should we do Nathaniel West Day of the Locust next week?
We could. It would make perfect sense. 1939. I referred to it all the time. Let's point for it. I have the book. I could do it, and if you want to do it and get a hold of the book, then it seems like a natural.
I think we should do that unless you write me an email. Otherwise, we'll stick with that.
Okay.
All right.
All right. Very good. That's it.
Thanks, Kevin.
Okay, folks. See you. Bye.